I'm Martin Fitzgerald, and I'm an assistant director at Manhattanville University's doctoral program in educational leadership. In this role, it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kenneth Mitchell. Ken is an associate professor of educational leadership at Manhattanville College, our university, where since joining the faculty in 2015, he teaches doctoral and leadership courses and supervises students in their dissertation research. Ken's research interests are wide and varied, encompassing school reform initiatives, educational leadership, K-12 literacy, and systemic change. He employs qualitative and mixed methods approaches, and at last count had chaired 56 out of the 90 dissertations committees he had served on. Ken has authored over 40 articles and is the lead editor of the American Association of School Administrators Journal of Scholarship and Practice. He's regularly sought after to speak at conferences across the state, the region, and at national levels. Beginning in 1976, Ken's career spans several decades. His roles include teacher, principal, assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and superintendent of schools. Notably, Ken played a key role in the planning and opening of the Seven Bridges Middle School in Chappaqua. His dedication to enhancing the craft of teaching and leadership includes leadership roles at SANES, NISCAS, NISMA, and the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents, as well as testifying before the New York State Senate, Board of Regents, and advising legislators at both state and federal levels. Ken is currently the executive director of the Chief School Officials Organization, representing school superintendents in Southern Westchester. He consults schools and district leaders and has been involved in leadership recruitment through School Leadership LLC. Understandably, having such a long and illustrious career, the arc and bend of Ken's journey included many moments of leadership during times of crisis. And while knowing Ken's humility would not allow him to list his successes, there was one crisis I would like to point to as a significant moment in his career. In 2009, while superintendent of the South Orangetown School District, Ken was confronted by an armed parent who entered his office during work hours. Ken's calm, poised presence and leadership in that moment averted what could have been some very tragic outcomes. Despite the trauma that comes with such events, Ken regrouped and returned to his desk the following day, demonstrating a strength of character in a time of crisis and a commitment to his community that one could only hope for. Ken has a doctorate from Fordham University, a certificate of advanced graduate study from SUNY New Paltz, and both a Master of Science and a Bachelor of Arts from SUNY Cortland. I know you join me when we extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ken Mitchell. Ken.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, that's very nice of you. I was going to frame this with why I get invited to things like this. It's been a while since the event that Martin referenced. Prior to that, though, I had many unfortunate experiences with crises. I've been in actual fires, bomb threats where there was actually a device. I had a confrontation with an adult gang leader who came to the school wanting to meet one of our students who had disrespected his son. I've had employees and students arrested in my office. I've had multiple deaths by suicide and accidents of students, staff, and parents. I was a principal during 9/11. I've had child abuse and domestic violence spill into the schools or the districts where I work. I was carjacked once. I've dealt with bus accidents and car accidents, and there were four armed students during the time of my role as a superintendent and as a principal. I disarmed 2 students with guns during a time as a principal. So sometimes the victim gets blamed. So following the June 9th event, when the parent came into the office, the media wanted to know what I had done to provoke the parent. And so you're probably thinking, after I've just given you an illustration of all these events, what is this guy doing wrong that all these things are happening to him? And it's really just a matter of being around too long. You know, Martin said, I'm on my 48th year of this work. So it's where I've been. And what I'd like to do is just give you a very brief overview of what happened. And then I'm going to contextualize that, because I know Tasha's monitoring the time. So on June 9th in 2009, it was during the H1N1 bird flu epidemic, and a call went into my assistant superintendent for curriculum from a parent. She was out. I told my secretary, I'll take the call. I spoke to the parent. How can I help you? Parent was rambling. He was incoherent. He wanted to know why on our Q&A we didn't have information about the handicapped and the elderly and the effect of the bird flu on them. So I said, okay, no problem. I will get that on tonight's Q&A, because I was constantly updating. About an hour later, my secretary informed me that the parent was here to see me, and then looked at me in horror and said, he has a gun. We had a security guard, a retired New York City policeman, and he held the gun up to him, walked by him, came down to the office, pointed it at me. I was with my secretary and my deputy superintendent. I told them, leave. I'll take care of this. I didn't need 3 people in the room. That would really complicate things. He grabbed me by my tie. He yanked me into the office. He locked the door, pulled the shades. He had a lighter, and he had a bottle of beer, and he had a gun. And for the next 45 minutes, I very calmly tried to talk him down. He said to me, you're not talking yourself out of this. I've done it before. I'll do it again. 1 to the head, 2 to the chest. And he pointed the gun at me. So I was able to convince him to move to my desk so I could show him that I accommodated his request regarding the Q&A. And he went along with that. So we went over to my desk. I pulled it up, and I could tell he wasn't even looking at it. He told me that he was friendly with the police department. So I said, why don't we call them right now? Maybe they can help both of us get out of this jam. So I put the phone on speaker. We called the police. Nobody picked up. Because where were the police? They were on the way. So fortunately, the conversation, the conversation we were having was recorded during the whole time, because that's what happens with the police department. Well, he was in a squatting position, kind of like a baseball catcher, and he had the gun pointing at me. And we were talking to each other. He was threatening. He was angry. He was distracted. He kept looking at the window to see if the police were there. The police were outside my door by this time, too. So he starts to escalate his hostile tone with me. And he put his gun down to take a drink of beer. And I thought, oh, should I pounce at this point? And I just didn't have the nerve. And I waited, and he did it again. I said to him, maybe I'll appeal to his sense of being a parent. So I showed him a photo of my 2 daughters, and I said, look, you're a dad, I'm a dad. And he said to me, you ain't no effing dad. And I said, oh, okay, now it's time to go. So the next time he put the bottle of beer down, I lunged at him. He put the gun down to take a sip of beer. I kicked the gun between his legs, and he dove for the gun, and I jumped on top of him. And he grabbed the gun, and I grabbed his wrist, and I slammed it down, and the gun dislodged. And then I was fortunate enough to get my arms behind his neck into a full Nelson and hold him down. And then the police, I called to them and told them to come in, and with a shotgun, they blew my door open, and a SWAT team of 4 folks came in, and they told both of us to put our effing hands up, which I did. I was the guy with the tie. It was a little disheveled at that time, but and then I was taken out. He was taken out. I testified before a grand jury. He went to prison for 5 years, and so that was it. So that's what happened. So I'd like to share just the secret of how, and I'm going to just show you a brief slide. people want to know, all right, so how did you do this? And this is the first time I've ever shown anyone this. Can you see that?
On my end, it's still loading.
Okay. Oh, oh, that's not it.
It's still loading.
Still loading. All right, let me try it again. Do you see that now?
Here it is.
Okay, the worst case scenario survival book. Can you see that? Right? I bet you don't have one of those. We have such great escapes and entrances. You can't see that too well? Okay.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. So obviously I didn't have the effect that I wanted to have. But somebody had given that to me. It's and obviously there's no such manual. Although I was teaching a class at BOCES last night, and I see that BOCES has an emergency guide with ways to respond to tornadoes, to earthquakes, to armed intruders, and those are great to have. I had a manual. I didn't pull the manual off the wall when he was there, open it up and review. Okay, now hold on a second, sir. I need to check to see how I'm handling this. There's no such guide because crisis happens suddenly. A crisis can be obviously a single event. It can be a series of events. It can be conditions. It can be something that happens over a period of time. Acts of violence, societal problems, financial crises, even political conflicts that create stressors. These are all forms of crises. So how do leaders prepare for low probability, high impact events without causing unintended harms? For example, following the time that I was involved in this event, I was invited to serve on panels with law enforcement. I even participated in an active shooter simulation at a closed section of Rockland Psychiatric Hospital. And it was very traumatic. It was too early for me to do something like that. And I was in a room and there was an actor running around with a gun, shooting it and swearing and saying, "I'm going to come and get you." Not a good move for me to be there. It was okay, I wrote it out. But when we have activities involving students with folks pounding on doors, they're terrified enough about a lockdown, being in a lockdown drill. And I'll talk a little bit more of that. And I have a student who is actually two students who are conducting research on that topic. So if you're a leader in crisis, you can only imagine how you will react under a severe stressor. You might think that you'll fight. You might want to get out. And I wanted to do the latter. I wanted to get out of there. I didn't want to have to fight. You might freeze. That didn't happen. What happened to me was that things slowed down. I'll never forget that moment. Everything slowed down and I had this sense of calm. And then I thought so this is how I die. That I still have a vivid recollection of that. So when we are in situations, leaders are in crisis, we use a variety of cocktails. We depend on our experience, on how well prepared we are. We try to anticipate. We try to be attuned to cues that we see in our environment and understanding the variations of crises. We try to be vigilant. We also need to collaborate and communicate, but we also rely on our instincts, which come from experience, and temperament, which is something that we can't always control because that's just who we are. So I have a few things that I'll share. Crisis is inevitable. It's obvious. It's unpredictable and it's sudden. That was a June 9th day. I was looking forward to my cabinet meeting. We were getting ready to prepare for end of school events. And all of a sudden I hear there's a parent with a gun who points a gun at me and is threatening to kill me. So there's always something around the corner. Never be relaxed. Crisis begins without warnings. it shatters our assumptions about our certainties. It is disorienting. And whether it's the crash of 0809, October 7th, and the people who suffered through that, the pandemic, so many of you who led during that time, and then dealing with the panic of the people in your organization, the panic of teachers during 9/11 whose spouses and children were working in the towers, or children whose parents were working in the towers. That was all happening. Now, the Army War College in 1997 talked about, they developed this concept called VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I teach a course in strategic planning, and we talk about that, and we apply that. And that's something those of you who work in crisis management or in leadership dealing with crisis need to consider. I'm sure that you do, because even the most predictable events develop in unpredictable ways, and every situation is different. It's futility to think that you can prevent, but you always have to plan for the worst. I think it was Eisenhower who said, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So try to visualize and rehearse scenarios. Martin and I worked together as administrators in Chappaqua. When we had our fire drills, we would block entrances and exits. We would reroute students upon returning. We'd ring the bell again to send them out. We tried to mix things up to keep the teachers and the students on their toes. Things change. And having been in an actual school fire and a bomb threat where there was a device in a locker, I watched students panic running out of the building when someone yelled, "There's really a bomb, go." And students fell and were injured. And that was when I was a teacher. Remember, don't overreach though. There can be unintended consequences. These drills can be very anxiety provoking. There can be PTSD for some children and adults who have had experience in other events. Also, no space is impenetrable. We had this event in my district where, by the way, a year later, we had a student bring in a gun and hold it up to an in-school suspension teacher and say, "I'm not staying in school suspension," and then walk through the building and then left the building, thank God. But no space is impenetrable. I would walk through the high school in that district after these two events, and there would be doors propped open with rocks in them so the teachers could exit to their car. So you use your imagination too when you're creating these scenarios. So I'll leave you with some final thoughts. And mitigation is probably the best that we can consider in trying to deal with the inevitable and the unpreventable. So we mitigate through cultivation, and we have to cultivate certain things. I used to say, and I changed my mind, mental detectors can be more powerful than metal detectors, but you can't say that to the public. They want 100% assurances. Parents don't want, they want to know that you will do everything to protect their children, and rightly so. Even when there's a low probability event, you cannot tell them there's a low probability event. So I'll give you one more story about, and it'll be very brief, about mental detectors. One morning when I was a principal, this was in 1995, I had a student walk into my office and said, "Teresa has a gun." I know I get in a lot of trouble, but you have to believe me, Teresa has a gun and is planning to kill Mr. R. Students, homeroom had just begun. I got on the PA. I said, "We're having an extended homeroom." Didn't explain why. I went to a locker. I found a loaded .357 Magnum. A student had taken it from her uncle, who was a professional football coach actually, and she was planning to shoot her teacher. And I took the gun and carrying a gun down the hallway. Back then, we didn't have protocols for this, very early on. So that was the second time that students informed me. That's about relationships. Those students had relationships with me. They trusted me. They came to me to tell me about students with guns. That cultivation takes place over time. You have to do this consistently with relationships, with planning. Things fall apart. Remember the great Sligo poet, Yeats, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." I know Susan, she's a poetess, she appreciate that. And Martin, while he's not a Sligo man, He appreciates Yates and will probably take credit for him. Spray for bees. Be visible, be vigilant. Your leadership is symbolic, and that's what sometimes draws people who have grievances. It's not what you've done, it's what you symbolize as the leader of the organization. So you have to do your best to provide concrete and psychological assurances of the community. Another bit of advice, never underestimate or dismiss a claim. If you say, oh no, those kids are just fooling around, you really can't believe what they're saying, whether it's about suspicions of child abuse, bullying, you have to address it, interrogate it, involve others in the process, build and sustain authentic relationships, be attuned as a leader to your environment, be out there, avoid post-event scapegoating too. Don't look to delegate blame to someone else. You sometimes have to take it as a leader. And then lastly, study what has happened in other places, become part of networks. I'm the executive director of the Southern Westchester Superintendents, and it baffles me when we have new superintendents who are less experienced who don't show up at our meetings where they can learn from very experienced leaders such as Ray Sanchez, who's in this session. You know how I feel about that, Ray, about making sure we get our less experienced leaders out there. Until the moment that the crisis begins, you feel relatively safe, you feel situated, suddenly everything changes. And as leaders, as current leaders, as future leaders, it may be a calling, but leadership is a privilege, and it's an awesome responsibility for all of you. How you define and wield your power and influence will have the effect on people and institutions in the short and long term. And you alone cannot fix it, especially in times when your leadership will be tested. So thank you for listening to my experiences and my few thoughts on leadership in crisis. Good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for your advice, your openness, and sharing those experiences. I don't think we could have asked for a better keynote speaker to lead us into today's discussion. So once again, thank you. And at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Lynn Allen, Deputy Superintendent from PNW BOCES, to introduce our moderator. Lynn?
Thank you, Tasha. And Dr. Mitchell, just another sincere round of thanks for sharing such a powerful and an impactful message. I think I speak for all of us in this Zoom room. You have our greatest admiration and respect always. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panel moderator. Although he is a familiar and comforting colleague to many of us, it is my great honor to formally introduce Frank Guglieri to you. Frank is the PNW BOCES esteemed Regional Safety Services Director. In this key leadership role, Frank has served as a consultant, trainer, advisor, and inspector in the areas of safety, risk management, and health in our region and far, far beyond. In this role, Frank has trained numerous public agencies on various forensic disciplines and has developed, implemented, and continues to support over 300 threat assessment teams involving more than 3,500 individuals across 8 counties. Yes, that's right, 300 threat assessment teams involving more than 3,500 individuals across 8 counties. Frank is also a certified trainer in the Comprehensive Student Threat Assessment Guidelines, better known by the acronym CSTAG, under Dr. Dewey Cornell. And he serves as a core member of 2 county threat assessment management teams. And additionally, he co-directs Putnam County's Handle with Care initiative, a program aimed at supporting students who may be exposed to trauma. If that wasn't enough, Frank also co-facilitates the Regional Crisis Team and the Administrator's Regional Crisis Team with Jackie Fama and I, both of which provide much needed support during school district's greatest times of need. There is no doubt that Frank has become a treasured colleague far and wide and cherished for his deep knowledge, particularly in areas all things health and safety. He surely is someone that none of us, especially at BOCES, could ever do without, and to know him is to love him. Without further ado, I give the virtual floor to Frank Guglieri, my dear colleague and friend.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I really appreciate that wonderful intro. And it's great to be here amongst all of you, talking about a topic so near and dear to my heart, which is crisis. Crisis comes in many forms, and I know we have a very tight timeline. So I want to make sure that I just give the floor, to our esteemed panelists. And, Dr. Mitchell, again, I, never tire of hearing of you and your stories, right? And the lessons learned and just some of the ways that you've approached it. So thank you. I appreciate you saying that every situation is different. When we talk about crisis, right? I always try to frame the definition, and crisis is going to look different to everyone, and it's going to look different to everyone at every time, right? A morning of a day crisis is going to be different than the afternoon, right? And, crisis to me is anything that can destabilize a person, place, or organization, right? So, I love the breadth of our panelists because of the different scope of their research. And again, I'm glad everybody's here because I think that, it's almost like a smorgasbord, right, of expertise here, something to appeal to everyone. So with that being said, I do want to first introduce friend of mine, Dr. Greg Brown. Dr. Brown has served in the field of public education for more than 20 years. Prior to returning to BOCES as our assistant superintendent, he served as a classroom teacher and coach at North Rockland, a building administrator at Arlington High School, regional curriculum coordinator and assistant director of curriculum and instructional services here at PNW, which is where I got to know him very well. And then we were able to continue to work together when he was the deputy superintendent at the Hyde Park School District. He holds a Bachelor of Science from SUNY at Oneonta, a Master's of Arts from Marist, a Master's of Science in Education from Iona, and a Doctor of Education from Manhattanville University. Dr. Brown also serves as an adjunct faculty member at the New York Institute of Technology and Manhattanville University, where he regularly serves on dissertation committees. So I'm going to pass the floor to Dr. Brown to introduce his research and to give you guys an overview of it, and then I'll take the mic back. Dr. Brown, all you.
Well, thank you, Frank, and good evening, everyone. What a privilege to be in this virtual room with all of you. And Dr. Mitchell, I want to say thank you for really that candid and raw depiction of what happens and can happen when we assume these roles as leaders. And thank you for just your bravery, and your contributions to me personally and to everybody I know in this room. In 2009, I was a classroom teacher at North Rockland when the event that you spoke about took place, not that far up the road. And I see Harry Lefevre, or is here also? Harry, I see him now. And I remember in 2009, I had recently finished a master's in that came with the certification of school building leader, and I was considering going into the leadership side of education. And we talked about in one of my classes these very things that you experienced, not at the same level. And over the 20 years that I've been in education, I actually started in a little bit of a different way. I started cleaning school buildings, actually, and got to know staff and whatnot that way. I've run into situations where, Frank, I liked how you said it, that schools are destabilized, and that can be physically, that can be emotionally, and we're going to get to hear a lot of different research that covers those different bases. So I want to just take a really brief moment to share with you the study that I completed in 2016. It was called Leadership Skills Requirements Across Organizational Levels. And just to give you a real brief context setting, the study of leadership is one of the world's oldest studies and preoccupations, actually. And leadership skills are highly valued in all arenas, education included. And you can see that in industrial, educational, even the military settings and different social movements. Leadership plays a critical role, if not the most critical role. And, I didn't come up with these ideas myself, but I'm happy to share them with you this evening. A few hundred years ago, it was believed that you were born with certain traits, trait-based leadership. This stood up monarchies and other forms of government of the time. Those leadership skills were passed to you in a hereditary fashion. And people were expected to act and behave and exhibit those leadership traits. So trait-based leadership was one of the oldest theories of leadership. You may know it was called great man theory. I would say great person theory, right? That kind of gave way to a more contemporary view of leadership that was both trait and situational. So you had to have the traits and you had to have the right conditions. So situational leadership evolved. Even more frequently, or even more contemporarily rather, there was the study of skills-based leadership. And that really resonated with me as a former coach and a former athlete and as a teacher. Being able to learn a skill and get better at it every day was really encouraging. The idea that leadership skills were this static thing that you were born with, you had it or you didn't, wasn't my lived experience. So when I sought to study leadership, I was really attracted to the skills-based leadership theory. So what did we do? We did a replication study of the leadership skills Strataplex that was originally designed for use with US government employees, ambassadors actually. And it looked at 4 different types of leadership skills: cognitive, which you would imagine those are the speaking, active listening, reading, writing, communication type skills, critical thinking even. Interpersonal, which I think Dr. Mitchell mentioned quite a bit when he was talking. That's social perspective ofness, being aware of others' reactions and understanding why they're reacting the way that they do, adjusting your actions and relations to others. That's coordination, negotiating, bringing others together and reconciling differences, and persuasion, which I think in all times of crisis, and even not, that becomes really important, persuading others to change their minds and or behaviors. Then there's the management skills of fiscal and plant resources, personnel resources. But then ultimately there were the strategic skills, the visioning, the systems perception skills, the systems evaluation skills, the identification of key causes, problem identification, and then solution appraisal, that reflective practice at the end where you look at what was the outcome? Did I intend for that outcome to happen the way it did? And then what can I learn from it? So the study itself was administered to 1,100 school leaders, ranging in position from assistant principal to building principal, assistant superintendent or director to superintendent. The original study found that cognitive skills, interpersonal, business, and strategic skills could be identified as separate skill sets. My study was able to replicate that in educational leaders. The original study also purported that cognitive skills would be in a higher percentage, or perceived as a higher percentage, than interpersonal, followed by business and strategic. In education, I found something a little bit unique and different. They didn't follow in the same order of importance with educational leaders. And as you might imagine, based on the topic that we're discussing tonight, educational leaders said that strategic skills were needed in the greatest amount to do their jobs, followed by interpersonal, then cognitive. So this was really kind of an important takeaway from the study that I did, which was that strategic skills really flipped with those cognitive or communication skills in the work that leaders do. And as you can imagine, the amount of strategic skill necessary to do the job increased as you went from assistant principal to principal, principal to assistant superintendent, assistant superintendent to superintendent. So that was really the basis of my study and some of the findings. Things that I think are pertinent to our discussion tonight is that, again, that strategic skill is required in the greatest amount, that educational leaders, they require a more balanced amount of these 4 leadership skills, it was much more stratified in the original study, and that when you controlled for all of the different factors, that the highest positive relationship to organizational level was with the strategic leadership skills. So I'm not really sure if we're supposed to go into anything much beyond our study, and I want to be cognizant of time. So I'm going to stop right there. But I would say that if I were to do this study again in 2024, post-pandemic, I wonder how that most recent series of crises and like the mini crises that fell underneath the pandemic for educators and for educational leaders, I wonder if some of my findings would have shifted. I have a hypothesis that I'll share for later, but I think I'm going to end it there and turn it back over to Frank to introduce the next scholar's research. And something popped up on the screen there. I think all of our dissertations are readily available through the Manhattanville Library, but I would be more than happy to share additional information in the chat while Frank's doing the introduction.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brown. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to hearing your further hypothesis, because that's, it just sparked some questions from when you were going through your 4 sections of leadership skills, right? I think that the interesting takeaway was that big paradigm shift, right? During COVID and then after COVID, right? And I think we all can agree, and I see a lot of people just nodding, right? Because we all lived it in different ways. Most of us probably as leaders, but even in other roles, personal, professional, it was really an interesting game changer. And I, Dr. Allen and I spent a lot of time during COVID together, being the site managers for BOCES. And I remember, I remember a lot of things she says, but another thing that I remember her saying to me was this would be a fascinating dissertation topic. And I said, the only person that would say this in the midst of a pandemic while we were managing BOCES for 12 hours would be Dr. Allen thinking about a next possible dissertation topic. So for those of you that know Lynn, right, you can see her saying it and doing it and all that type of stuff. And I wouldn't, put it past her to have even been gathering data in that moment, right? So I'll never forget that. So it was just one of the at least the bright points for me as a leader, was being able to share that time with her. So again, being cognizant of the time, I'm going to shift now over to Dr. Ryan Fisk. Dr. Fisk is a graduate level professor, associate editor, and reviewer for the AASA Journal of Scholarship and Practice. Co-founder of #EdCamp Westchester and president of New York State AHPERD Technology Section. He brings nearly 20 years of educational experience, serving previously as Director of Technology and Educational Technology Specialist, and prior to that as a health and physical education teacher, department chair, and varsity JV coach. He admires the ever-evolving EdTech field and is particularly passionate about the ways in which appropriate, effective, and engaging technology can be used to uplift teaching and learning across all content areas. He enjoys learning and sharing with other like-minded educators and has presented at over 140 conference sections at the local, state, regional, and national levels. He recently published 2 peer-reviewed manuscripts detailing the impact of artificial intelligence in and around education and how teaching and learning can adapt. So without further ado, Dr. Fisk, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank, and good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here tonight, and I'm honored to be a part of this panel. That's a tough act to follow, though. So let me get my slides up here for a second. I just want to set the stage also as I get my slides up here. With a background in technology, we all play different positions on the field, right? We're all here for the kids. We're all here to support the mission of our districts, the strategic plans of our districts. But of course, we have different responsibilities around this Zoom room here. So when I think of crises, there's different types of crises that my phone would be ringing off the hook for. So I'm going to go into some of those today and some of the research that I've done and the practical application and takeaway from my, corner of the field, if you will. I want to latch on to 3 things that Dr. Mitchell said in his opening keynote that sort of resonated with me. That was a powerful story, but 3 sort of common elements that I'm going to try to, touch on in my segment here. Crises are sudden. Planning is imperative. And finally, the importance of cultivating relationships. I'm going to try and hit on all these again from my, vantage point. So some of the crises that I think about that I deal with range from academic integrity, academic dishonesty, going all the way up to data breach, social media misuse that can lead to real physical consequences inside or beyond school grounds, ransomware attacks. It's the whole gamut. So these are some questions that I think about, and then I try to prepare for, and I try to prepare our stakeholders for. So number one, what's our crises plan, right? We did say that crises can be sudden. So what's the plan? What's the fire drill look like? What procedures do we have in place when in the event of a data breach, somebody's account is compromised? Now everything's connected to the cloud. Information travels immediately. So it's, I put this GIF in there if you guys can see this. It's not just taking the computer and hosing it with a fire extinguisher or chucking it into the dumpster. Everything is connected to the internet now. So, what do? There's New York State Education Department. They say there's certain phone calls, there's certain checkoffs that we have to do with the state. But then what are we doing in district? Who are the players that we're involving in the process? What, if any, announcements are we making publicly? And then behind the scenes, what safeguards are we putting into place to mitigate the spread or the potential of things getting worse? You see a graphic over there, the anatomy of a ransomware attack, and some research here. 90% of ransomware attacks come through. Does anybody want to take a guess? Ransomware or phishing attacks come through what mechanism? I see the chat. And yeah,
Work
you have it. Emails and spam. Yeah, that's it. So they're coming to our inbox, folks, right? So we're getting those emails that look suspicious, or I should flip that around. They look authentic and legitimate. Hey, so-and-so sent you a file in Microsoft Office. Click here, and then you're presented a login screen. But that login screen is not actually Microsoft. It's fake Microsoft, and your credentials are going off to a different place. Same for Google, same for any other, reliable website. So they're spoofing those login pages. And a side note, by the way, just very ironic. I always chuckle at this when you Google image search for hacker or malicious actor on a computer. It's always someone wearing a dark hoodie over their head. So this graphic kind of underscores that. Email. We think about that, and I'm going to get to that on the education front. My last question, but a lot of those attacks come in through email. So what policies and procedures do we have in place to sort of isolate or sandbox that inbox, so that the rippling effect, like a firewall, we're sort of stopping it from spreading further. So next up, what safeguards do we already have in place or are we planning to put into place? One of the big ones, MFA. I'm sure we're all familiar with MFA. It might as well have been a 4-letter word at the time that it came out. People were not thrilled about using their cell phones to, log themselves into email and various district services, but it was a necessary protection. Multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, as many of us know, if you do any online banking or shopping, or obviously for our districts now, you put in your password to log into your email or a certain district account, and then you get a 6-digit code to an authenticator app or via text message or something else. So that's the second factor. The second factor is the physical device that only you hold. So in order for someone to gain access to your account, they've got to have both of those factors. Having your password alone is not enough to get them into your account. So that's why multi-factor is leaps and bounds more secure than a single factor authentication, aka a username and password. So some stats on MFA and some things that we want to think about, with multi-factor authentication, questions that come up. A lot of districts are doing multi-factor authentication. They're doing it well, and we're using it for our emails. But then let's take it further. Are we using MFA, multi-factor authentication, for our other various systems, such as our instructional apps like iReady, Renaissance products, etc.? What about our student information system for those of us on Infinite Campus, PowerSchool, School Tool? Are we using MFA or some sort of single sign-on there that is requiring that 6-digit code as well? Because if we're not, if we don't have everything under this multi-factor authentication umbrella, now we've got vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities are cause for concern, and those are ways that we can get attacked, right? So we want to safeguard all of our accounts, not just our email, but the financial management software. So Envision is a big one that a lot of districts are using. So we want to make sure all those are sort of shielded under this umbrella of MFA. And what I've done and what I've seen done is, we use a single sign-on mechanism. So, oh, you want to log into Frontline? It's going to pop up to a Microsoft or a Google logon page. You enter your district provided Google or Microsoft account credentials, and then it bounces you back to Frontline and you're logged in. So when we have MFA set up for Google or for Microsoft, by inheritance, by association, we now have MFA on all those other programs as well. So I'm going to go to my last page here because I know I'm coming up on time. And lastly, and this is probably the most important, right? We want to take a proactive approach. We want to foster those relationships, as Dr. Mitchell said. We want to have the plan in place. And we want to make sure all of our stakeholders are well educated. So what are we doing? How are we helping to get the message out to our stakeholders, to our users, be it student, staff, fellow administrators, on the importance of staying vigilant and staying safe online? So one way to do it is by running phishing campaigns, right? As some of us have seen fake phishing emails. They're not real, but they're fake. And then if you click into it and you put in your credentials, it says, hey, we got you. And then you have to go through like a 5-minute tutorial video. Another big thing that is, as Frank said, I did research and publish on AI, and AI is obviously ever evolving. But now what we're seeing with artificial intelligence is the evolution of deep fakes, false images, false videos. I could go on a paid service and I can make a video of myself doing a parent-facing seminar or tutorial, speaking a different language. So I can provide a script, upload some pictures and some sample footage of my face, and then it'll recreate a video of me, of fake me, saying and doing something else. So we're seeing there's a rapid evolution. So we need to sort of play the other side of it too, with making sure our students and our stakeholders are informed consumers of the media. How can we spot these things? And then also, when we talk about AI and academic integrity, an interesting piece of research or a stat that came out at me is the cheating before and after AI has not changed. So artificial intelligence is not the X factor here. So I'm working oftentimes with teachers and with leaders on, looking at the assignment, looking at the deliverable that we're asking of our colleagues, of our students, and saying, is there a way that we can make this more AI resistant, make it more personal, make it more meaningful to our target audience so that they're less likely to use AI to regurgitate or summarize information to respond to that. I want to give a quick shout out here also to a product that's out of White Plains, Anonymous Alerts. We talk about shop local, shop small business. This is a great company. I've used them in 2 of my districts now. Anonymous Alerts is a way that we can allow students and staff and even community members report something safe and anonymously. I'm not going to give you the whole pitch deck for them, but I just want to put that out there because educating our users and being vigilant also requires, and not to step on toes with DASA or other district processes, but we want to give another lane for our users to report something that's not right, because we want to, head that off before it becomes a serious threat, before it becomes that gun in the school. So this is a way to help us do that through Anonymous Alerts. And like I said, they're based out of White Plains. So I'm up on time. I tried to run through that as quick as I can. I want to close out with a question, and this is just sort of a food for thought. Throw it in the chat as Frank transitions over to our next speaker. But I just want to throw this out there because there's been a lot, and I've been doing some research in the space too on cell phones. Right? Once upon a time, cell phones as learning devices. Great, and then Chromebooks and iPads and laptops came out. So I've seen there's been kind of a shift away from cell phones, but now, as cliche as it sounds, we've seen a resurgence of social media, short form social media, TikTok, Snapchat, things like that. And now schools are taking a more firm stance. Governor Hochul on her listening tour throughout the state. So I'm curious from our friends here in attendance, does your district currently have a cell phone ban in place? And if so, what does it look like? So if you want to chime in the chat or send it privately, I'm not sure if you can do that to just me, but if you feel comfortable throwing it in the chat, I would love to hear your feedback on that. And thank you, Dr. Diamond. And Dr. Diamond, that's a good segue, is going to be next. So, folks, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. And Frank, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate it. And you know, I love the picture of Ron Swanson throwing the computer in the trash, right? Like, you know, I think about that a few times a day, usually when I get all those emails, right? Like it might be nice to go off the grid. So I think is really apropos to a lot of us on here. So without further ado, I'm now going to transition into Dr. Madeline Sanchez Diamond, who currently serves Director of Human Resources at the Public Schools of the Tarrytowns. Prior to her role in HR, she served as Director of Language Programming in the Peekskill City School District, excuse me. Dr. Diamond received a bachelor's degree in business administration from Mercer University, a master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages from NYU, a master's in educational leadership from the College of St. Rose, and a doctoral degree from Manhattanville University. Dr. Diamond has a personal passion for leadership development and currently serves as a leadership coach for new leaders who oversee curriculum and language programming. Her other passion is supporting young women of color through mentorship and leadership programming, as well as mentoring aspiring educators of color. She is committed to the community she serves and has a strong drive to inspire positive change within those communities. So without further ado, Dr. Sanchez Diamond, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you everybody for being here. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly, and I'm going to here we go. Can you see that? Yes? Okay, awesome. So the title of my research was Leading Through Crisis, the Role of Emotional Intelligence in Elementary School Principals as Leadership During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I went way left with what I was doing professionally versus what I wanted to study. And my purpose really was to see if and how elementary school principals access the traits of emotional intelligence during their leadership during COVID-19. And on the screen right now is the model that I use, Daniel Goldman's 4-domain model, which you may be familiar with. And so the goal ideally was for me to see if any of these traits came up in my research study, and to see if their understanding of emotional intelligence was cursory or not. And also to understand if it was evidence, how did they know about it? What was the training like? Was it, School of Hard Knocks, or was it actually official training? But my findings were actually different than what I was expecting. And I think of Dr. Mitchell telling us in class, just be open to what can come out of the data. Because what actually came out of the data was more so a sense of emotional depletion on behalf of the elementary school principals, as well as the physical toll it took on them. And what's interesting is that EI is not something new. I mean, I've been kind of obsessed with this concept for many years. I've done extensive reading about it. Corporate America has been on this bandwagon for years. The medical field has also jumped on it. And education, we've dipped in, right? We talk about SEL for students. We talk about supporting our educators. But what fascinated me is that I feel like nobody has ever thought about the administrators, right? And so what I want to share with you is just some of the things that came from the findings. And I'll end it my section with a very powerful statement that came from one of the participants. But like I said, the findings actually showed the emotional depletion that came from them leading through crisis. And so I have my laptop here. I just want to read to you some examples that participants shared. And these, again, elementary school principals. One said it was exhausting. Like, I just had enough. I just remember thinking I need to lie down. One said, I was constantly like, oh, come on, God, can I just get a minute to recoup? Another one said, it is a very dangerous message that we are sending to school leaders when there's value placed on bringing parents back to give them a sense of belonging, but there's no value on the leaders themselves or their emotional well-being. And this person said, you can't pour from an empty cup. You just can't, right? The other one was also about boundaries, right? Being like doctors, they were on call 24/7. Nobody was asking them how they were doing, how they were feeling. They felt like there was the blurred line between their personal life and their work life, right? And I think we all, kind of experienced that. But I do think that building leaders, and I've never been a building leader, but I do think that they experienced COVID-19 differently. Two other participants shared how it actually manifested in them physically. So one said, I got fed up after a while of people relentlessly complaining. It was so disenchanting and frustrating. I swallowed it all up, meaning their emotions, and you just keep swallowing things up. It blows up in other ways. I bottle things up and then it got me in other ways. I wasn't sleeping. I was breaking out. I was emotionally eating. Then I started feeling bad about my body. The personal attacks and complete lack of recognition that I was going through this pandemic too. The person said it kind of took away my sparkle. And I'll tell you, I found out after that this participant actually left their role of elementary school principal. That's how traumatizing the experience was. Another one said, it definitely took a toll on me. The stress was building. The stress was building inside of me, and I do believe the growth of the tumor that eventually got a cancer diagnosis was related to the stress brought upon by COVID-19. So, this was my actual finding, right? And then I was able to ask them, like, what do you think helped prepared you through this? And I got a mix. I wanted to see if there was any official training, whether, it was kind of like what I've done, just learn about it on my own. Or what they considered to help them lead through crisis. A lot of it was, it was how I was raised and adversity and things I've experienced. Very few, I don't even think any actually mentioned ever being formally trained on emotional intelligence. So to me, that led me to believe, when we're asked, is emotional intelligence, I think, Greg was talking about that, right? Traits that we're either born with or we build. And I was fascinated about that because I feel like it's a mix of both. It's a combination of your personality, and it's a combination of being able to be aware and lean into wanting to learn more about developing these emotionally intelligent traits. And I think that you are able to build it. So I think output is important. I think if you're able to lean as a leader into wanting to know more about how to be emotionally intelligent, it can happen. And I think there's a level of needing to understand how you need to regulate yourself and being aware of that during crisis, right? Crisis, you can either become a tyrant, right? Or you can kind of behave like Dr. Mitchell. And he talked about temperament. He talked about how that helped him a lot. And I think that if I share back my screen again, I think that has everything to do with being self-aware and being able to self-manage yourself. But he also talked about relationship management with the situation with the students. So that is managing relationships, right? And being attuned to others is social awareness. So in my opinion, I feel that we have kind of not focused too much on how to develop emotional intelligence in school leaders. And I think that it is necessary. I think we can easily go into a situation of fight or flight, but if we're able to pause and recognize what we are sensing in ourselves emotionally and even the physical signs, I feel like it will help us adapt, kind of handle crisis, I say that very broadly, in a better way. And so I'm just going to wrap up with showing you two quotes. This is from part of the research. So COVID-19 pandemic exposed the intense emotional turmoil inflicted upon school leaders. It has offered opportunities to reassess the educational leadership landscape and what is required to properly prepare leaders to lead during times of high stress. Findings from my study expose an urgency for policymakers and educational leadership training program leaders to reevaluate antiquated considerations of coursework offerings that ignore the value of emotional intelligence and overlook the time-honored aviation rule of putting your mask on first before helping others. So I'll end with a quote from a participant, and I'm sorry for the little, picture there, but she said there are some things that people are still processing, like everything else. Some of this we won't see unfold until the next 3 to 5 years. So what does that look like for school leaders? The single story about school administrators should not be that this person has magic fairy dust or is made of Teflon where nothing is going to impact them, and that they'll keep moving and it's going to be fine. It's not human reality. So that is, a very quick glimpse of my study. I still remain passionate about emotional intelligence and leadership. And now in my role in human resources, I feel like I get to exercise it some, so it's fun. Thank you for my TED Talk.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. That was great. And, I do appreciate all the panelists, just being mindful of the time, allowing us at, the next 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So what I would like to do first is I'd like to open it up to the floor to see if anybody has a question, whether they'd like to unmute their mic and pose the question or post it in the chat, and I'm happy to restate it and then direct it towards the panelists. So I'll give everybody, some good 30-second or so wait time. And then if not, I do have some questions of my own because, again, this is the world that I live in every day.
I see a hand up from John.
Yep, John, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Oh boy, thank you so much for this. I got my doctorate in educational leadership and management a year ago at Drexel University, and this is my first time back with my tribe. I feel like, whoa, my people. And also, I'm looking for a job. Okay, so anyway, yeah, thank you for this. This is wonderful. I also taught in the New York City public school systems in some troubled schools. I know exactly, Ken, what you're talking about, situations like that. I never dodged a bullet, but came close, So I want to throw something in here that's a little bit kind of related, but not exactly. Yes, I think it actually is. I think it's the elephant in the room right now, because I think in terms of our democracy, that's a crisis, right? We have a crisis going on in terms of the polarization and kids coming to school every day, feeling wounded by what's happening with that crisis. I mean, I got my John Dewey right here. John Dewey, his first book was Democracy in Education. And that's like really the fundamental purpose of educators is I think should be a civic one. So what do you feel about that? I did my doctoral focus on movies and media, actually, sort of just to throw a little bit of another element into this potpourri. I looked at movies and media, for a better world. And my wife and I actually co-produce a TV show on education. Education, the arts, and social change. We combine those three. We were nominated for the Yeadon Prize, which is, equivalent of a Nobel Prize in education. But anyway, so what do you think about this crisis of emotions that's going on in our country, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, no, thank you, John. Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And I think this may, be applicable, right, to, two, if not all of our panelists, right? And I'll first ask Dr. Diamond to weigh in, because I think there's that emotional component there. And then I would ask Dr. Brown to weigh in just a little bit on maybe, either the strategic skill side or even a little bit larger view. And then round off with Dr. Fisk if there's anything that you'd like to plug in from that IT educational technology lens. Perfect. Thank you. So Dr. Diamond, I'll pass it to you first.
I mean, I think just in a quick sense, it's, there is a lot of emotions involved with our current climate, right? I'm just going to speak from my personal belief, and I just am a firm believer that, we can feel what we want to feel. We can agree to disagree, but, let's be conscious about regulating ourselves in discussions that may be heated. And I think that's where sometimes we lack, we fail to agree to disagree, and things get heated and people get elevated. And that's where things can go sideways. So I think for me, and just basing it on what I just spoke about, it's just being able to regulate yourself in heated discussions that you may be disagreeing with what's being said.
Take the minute to put the mask back on, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Brown?
John, I want to thank you for your question. And I went off screen for a second because I had to grab my copy of John Dewey's Democracy in Education that sits on my shelf behind. But I also wanted to think a little bit about his, predecessors, because William James and others really grappled with what you're talking about now and what is the purpose of education. And I think by extension, what's the purpose of educational leadership? And then what's the purpose of educational leadership in a time of crisis? So I think it comes down to some of the things that we can hold fundamental to our purpose. And, both Ryan and Madeline both spoke about, and I love this part of the last thing, the qualitative piece that you shared about the experience. Like, it's so powerful. We're really in an opportunity now to show compassion to ourselves and to others. We have an opportunity to be examples of what leadership is and can be. And it's a responsibility, and I would venture to say a bit of a burden at times also. So where are we? I think as a student of history, we've had many of these inflection points in our history. This isn't new. The research on civics education, if you go back 100 years, they said the same thing that they're finding in the research right now, that we don't have a good sense of who we are, how our government works, and what our role is in that. I will just say I'm encouraged by the Board of Regents, the Blue Ribbon Commission's findings, the spotlight that's being put on civic education, but more importantly, authentic performance tasks and learning. And I think that as educational leaders, we play an important role in leading by example, by giving voice to everyone, by using those interpersonal skills, that social perspectiveness. And one thing I didn't share earlier was that assistant principals and assistant superintendents were more similar, and building principals and superintendents were more similar when they looked at how they reported the quantity of these different leadership skills required to do the job. And what I was going to say earlier, and on my hypothesis now, is I bet they're all even grouped even tighter together, because the roles of assistant or executive leader, whether at the building or the district level, based on your sphere of influence, I think has narrowed. We all hold an important piece of leadership. And one of the things that I recommended is that we have to extend this concept to our teacher leaders and to our student leaders. So I would say, what are the things that we can do as a field is bring all the voices in, and that includes thinking of leadership a little bit differently and extending that, cultivating teacher leadership roles that don't require teachers to leave the classroom to take on a leadership role in their school or in their district or community, and the same thing for our students, so that we can teach them how to be civically active in the most important community that they're a part of, which is their school.
Great, thank you. And Ryan, I'll pass it to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to say that what the two of them said would be my answer as well, but I'm going to add maybe one more piece to it as well. I think with the, speaking to the technology, right, with social media and the connectedness and the whole idea of crowdsourced news and information, everybody has their own microphone. Everybody's their own publicist now. So that's obviously a double-edged sword, right? So what I would caution our users, our stakeholders, everybody that's doing great work in the field, in their schools and their districts on a day-to-day basis, all those face-to-face practices, but also let's be mindful of the headwinds that we're facing in our personal lives, on our devices, and just be mindful of that and be, we've got parent Facebook groups talking about this. We've got obviously the polarization of a lot of topics, political and otherwise. And I think that a big catalyst for that is that everybody has that voice and has that microphone. So I would sort of add my +1 to the constructive dialogue, agree to disagree, do it respectfully, understand that people are going to have different beliefs and backgrounds for a variety of reasons than you, and talk it out face to face, and just have that interaction and understand where they're coming from.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists for answering John's questions. And thank you, John, for the question. Next question, please.
I see a hand raised from Joe.
Yep, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, hi Frank. I'm very interested in character education. Dr. Mitchell knows that well. I wonder, I know, Dr. Mitchell, you've spoken a lot about how unpredictable and impossible to anticipate these types of things are. I wonder if in any of the research that you've conducted, whether I know mitigation is impossible, I understand, but I wonder if there were instances in which you were able to recognize that either strength of programs in a certain situation like athletics, or maybe like the culture within an educational organization, were able to just you were able to just see like a lower tick of instances of crisis within an institution that maybe has a stronger culture or a stronger character education program or a stronger athletic program where students are more able to be engaged. I just wonder, that's all. I'm just curious as to whether that came up in the research.
Well, it's about culture. And Greg talked about having a strategic vision. So everything needs to be done with a systemic lens. I've worked with a few of you. I worked with Martin, I worked with Harry, and you know that one of my priorities was having alignment, K-12, horizontal, vertical, not just on curriculum, but also on programs, character ed programs. So I'll give you one example, Joe, and there isn't a direct correlation. It's hard to measure culture. Yeah, there are instruments that do that. But so I think that school psychologists are an underutilized resource in a district. They can provide so much. And Gina Cunningham's here, and she's one of my doctoral students and is going to be doing some work around that. But early on, when I was a superintendent, I brought all my school psychologists together. And I said to them, I want to develop a developmental continuum that we can use from preschool right up through 12th grade as a way to educate teachers, other leaders in the district, principals, about how students have different developmental needs and changes as they move from childhood to pre-adolescence to adolescence. And then examine the programs that we have, such as the bullying programs, anti-bullying programs. But for example, we had 3 elementary schools at the time, and they had varying bullying programs. So I said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we look at which programs, multiple versions. Teachers had their own programs, they had different grade level programs. Let's find out which ones are the most effective, and let's be consistent. But let's use this developmental continuum. That was the basis of having, it was a character ed initiative that was founded on developmental responsiveness and educating everyone about why 13-year-olds act differently than 10-year-olds, and 18-year-olds act differently than 13-year-olds, and 4-year-olds act differently than 10-year-olds. These things are obvious, but we don't necessarily have the language and the science behind it to make good decisions about the kinds of programming that we have, and constantly go back to that, use that developmental continuum as a touchstone. So looking for consistency, that is a strategic approach, as Greg talked about. It considers the system, all levels of the system, and all schools within that system. I don't know if that helps answer your question, Joe, but that was the example that came to mind when you raised your question.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I see Joe nodding, so that's great. It looks like we have time for 1 or 2 more questions before we transition to the closing.
Hey, Frank,
Yes, Shelley?
Frank, can I piggyback on that last question also? Because I want to put
Sure.
my classroom teacher hat on for a second too. I think also in addition to the character education programs, I think also it helps to assess the clubs, the activities, the sports, the peer advisory programs. When I was a classroom teacher in Great Neck, I headed up the peer leadership program where we had upperclassmen, juniors, and seniors running advisory sessions for freshmen and sophomores. That ran every Wednesday morning for about 30 minutes. The school day was shortened by about 3 minutes per period to build in the time for that. What we found, I guess, anecdotally, it was a small high school, about 1,000 students. So what we found anecdotally, the more ways that we can sort of break down the traditional social norms, those social circles where, who sits with who at the lunch tables, by having these after school clubs and activities where students who may not socialize outside of school now have a common interest after school, where you have that advisory group, where you have upperclassmen, forging relationships with underclassmen, talking to them about life in high school and going through these sort of semi-structured lesson plans. I think the more opportunities, the more avenues we can create for that. So it's not, write out character education per se, but I think there's implicit, there's some things in there that help to build that sense of community and that sense of character and camaraderie and that family feeling across the school.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for jumping in. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Shelley, I did see you unmute your mic if you want to go. Shelley Owens. Yeah.
I just wanted to stop and say thank you for this. It's very validating in a lot of ways. And I'm sitting here thinking, it's Christmas, and you get on, or it's the holiday season, but everyone's talking about Christmas, right? And you get on social media and you have friends that are teachers and everyone's talking about how appreciated they feel and how all the things, let's do countdowns, 12 days of Christmas and make everyone feel good. And sometimes you feel like you're not feeling well because you're so worried about making everyone else feel better, right? And then you wonder, and I'll speak for myself, which is why I'm feeling a little validated. You're like, yeah, you have to take a minute because we're the ones pulling the fire bells and then scaring everybody. And then we know it's happening. But then when a fire bell really goes off, do we really know what to do if we're not pulling the fire bell? So it's a very ironic place to live in. And I think about that all the time. And so I found this very interesting and very actually validating because in the moment I'm still thinking about how to make sure the teachers are okay, but am I necessarily making sure that I'm okay and that I don't have muscle memory for things when I'm the one calling the drills and the bells and the lockdowns and right? And I'm trying to be sensitive to 4-year-olds, but I'm also trying to be sensitive to 44-year-olds, and I'm trying to be sensitive to the laws, and I'm trying to be sensitive to the parents. But at the end of the day, I'm scaring myself silly sometimes when I'm really trying to make sure everyone's a little desensitized. So I wanted to just say thank you for, providing this platform, because in the moment, it just kind of validated a lot of the things that I've been living with these last few months, with something as simple as acknowledging to parents that you're going to have a drill, and how it brings so much anxiety out of parents that you're dealing with above and beyond the drill itself and above and beyond. So there's so many things that come with doing everything with such a level of care and in crisis. And what you're really trying to do is bring awareness, but what you're really doing is keeping everyone in a space of you're almost a little unstable and trying to desensitize. But in reality, it's because nothing, to the points that have been made earlier, nothing is going to be exactly by the book. So I just wanted to, take 10 very short seconds to say thank you for every bit of every presentation today. It was very helpful.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you for acknowledging everybody on here. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
With that being said, what I'd like to do before we transition to the closing is maybe just give everyone, and I would, Dr. Mitchell, I would ask also for you too, but each of our panelists to just really quickly answer this final question, right? So I live in the world of crisis, right? One of the things we tell people all the time is you can't control time in a crisis, right? Time is ever marching on, right? And Madeline, we keep going back to your putting the mask on first, right? So, but, if there was one, insertion takeaway, right? Ryan, maybe it's throwing the computer in the trash or pulling the wires, right? Greg, maybe it's one skill. Madeline, maybe it's, again, after we put that mask on, what is that next immediate step that we're going to do? I would ask you all to just chime in, and Dr. Mitchell, I would ask to finish with you. So I'll start with Ryan first, if there was, again, just you can't control time, what's one thing you would tell people?
Put me on the hot seat here. Gosh, I think just having a safety net of support, relying on each other. We can't control time. We could have the best plan ever, but I think sometimes as educators, regardless of what we do in our day to day, we do a lot of things in isolation. So, I think having forums such as this. And using social media for professional use, such as Twitter, X, Blue Sky, etc. The smartest person in the room is the room, right? So let's see if we can continue to latch on some of those great ideas, the light bulbs that go off, and bring that back to our own setting.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Madeline, I would ask you now, what's your, again, I stole your put your mask back on, so you got to give me one more.
I know, and I keep thinking, I'm like, would I really actually put my mask on first? So it's like you wonder, right? But I would say that, just try to not go into like the fight or flight and just remain calm and look at the whole picture. And it's easy for me to say that, right? It's easy for me to say that. So that's just my hypothetical of just remaining calm, looking at the whole picture, because then if you as a leader are not calm, everything is going to go a little crazy.
So it sounds like take a deep breath. You like the breathing theme, right?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Greg?
I would just say maybe to show yourself and others grace. As leaders, we're the containers for a lot of different things and people's emotions, and especially when they're heightened in a crisis. I've got a Post-it note on my computer monitor that reminds me that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from exercising poor judgment. So again, like showing ourselves and others some grace, and putting people in a position where they can have the best outcome. There was a study, soccer shootouts, if you're familiar, you got to win by 2. You were twice as likely to score when you're shooting to win versus shooting not to lose. So a leader's role is to put people in positions to shoot to win as much as possible. So I'll just leave it with that.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Mitchell, I'll ask you to round us out, and then Susan, feel free to jump in and close.
Great, yeah. Your question reminded me of some moments that I had been in when I was scared. Not this particular incident, but I was scared, and I had to and I knew I was going to walk into a room. It might have been a boardroom that was packed with people, or it might have been a faculty right after school was dismissed on 9/11. And I remember self-talking myself before going into the room and saying, okay, you're the leader. Now, this is what you have to say, and you're responsible. You can do it. And I just buck up, Mitchell, and go in there and do it. Self-talk. And you think about the work all the time when you're a school leader, about every situation. You reflect, you criticize yourself. You'll be hard on yourself. It's just human nature, but it's a job that requires courage, and you sometimes have to be the one to encourage yourself to be brave.
Thank you. Susan, you're muted.
Sorry, and if I may just
Yeah,
ahead,
go ahead,
Susan.
please.
Sorry, really quickly, I put a link in the chat. This was so powerful today, and we would love to hear from you. What topics you want us to cover next? We really value and appreciate your feedback. And with that, I'm sorry, Susan, please.
No apologies needed. There is so much here where I see the comments in the chat, and I'm feeling it myself, just how important, timely, powerful this is, the stories that are shared both from research and our practice. So I'll try to capture a few things to sort of sum up what I've heard and give us some closing thoughts. One, as Dr. Mitchell powerfully shared his own story before he gave that, he went through this litany of all of the types of crises that he has experienced. And I was reminded of my own college administration days when I was the senior most administrator on campus, second to the president, and was often the one that was going to the building on fire and the bomb scares and, you know, suicides and all of those dreadful, dreadful scenarios. And the wisdom that he shared about relationships, never dismissing a claim, recognizing that, you know, concrete plans are only as good as sort of the psychological reassurances that you're going to put in place, and our moral imperative to really step up as leaders and be prepared to sort of own what is before us, meaning no scapegoating. Followed by Dr. Brown, who I really appreciated how he troubled the historical assumptions about leaders possessing particular traits, and that instead, as we've seen in the decades of literature on leadership, that we can learn, we're doing it right now from each other, kind of the types of skills that we need, and his research then investigating what are those skills that leaders are deploying during crises and the incredibly important strategic leadership skills that are needed. Dr. Ryan Fisk, following with technology crises, which certainly stems not just from his doctoral research, but his continuing practice and scholarship. And I don't know how folks in your roles keep up with the minute-to-minute changes that are happening in technology, and appreciated those questions that you posed around crisis plans, safeguards, and how we're educating users. I think we all really felt what Dr. Madeline Sanchez-Diamond shared from her qualitative research around the emotional intelligence. It connects back to Dr. Mitchell pointing out those relationships, but her research was hearing kind of how are they reconciling some of their own social emotional realities as they are being responsive to organizational, interpersonal needs and things that are unfolding around them. And one of the most powerful lines from her data that she read was, "You can't pour from an empty cup." And so while we sometimes overuse this notion of putting on your mask first, we do need to be reminded as leaders walking into crises, how are we cognizant of what is before us? And so, Frank, I appreciated your closing request there for each of them to make a comment. And I just want to recap what I heard, that Dr. Fisk said, make sure that you have the safety net of resources around you, and that the smartest person in the room is the room. And so don't lead in isolation. And we're doing that right now, right? We're all benefiting and learning from each other. Dr. Sanchez-Diamond said you got to remain calm. You need to know how to regulate your own self as a leader. And we might oversimplify that as putting on the mask first, but that phrase is one for us to keep reminding ourselves of how we show up and what have we put on and prepared ourselves for. Dr. Brown reminding us to give ourselves grace. This is messy, right? And some of our greatest learnings come from when we trip and we pick up and dust ourselves off. And that we always need to try to shoot to win. And there's times you're going to miss anyway, but those losses are actually gains in the long run. And that's connected with Dr. Mitchell's closing notation that we're going to be scared, right? While he gave us the acronym, what was it, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, I think, that, you know, all of that means that we are not always going to know what to do. And so the self-talk and encouraging ourselves to be brave is really important. I like that Eisenhower quote that plans are useful. So it's not that we don't have plans, but at the end of the day, it's really the planning process and some of those mental rehearsals around self-talk, as well as not running every routine in the same way, meaning you're going to block some different exits on different days, both literally and metaphorically. I think we also realize that if we don't have Dewey's Democracy in Education on our shelf so that we can pull it out, that we all need to get on Amazon and buy that as well. So in these moments, we can go, oh, me too. I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing your wisdom. Dr. Mitchell, for your powerful keynote. Frank, I really appreciate your moderation, and it embodies in your role as a member of PNW BOCES, the incredible partnership that Manhattanville Doctoral Program has for the last 15 years and continuing, that puts on programs like this and many others. So thank you all for this. I think we've all been lifted by each other in these relationships as well as our learning. So thanks.